Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sage Care, a podcast where I'll take you on my own personal journey of healing, growth, acceptance, trauma, resilience, change, oppression, resistance, childhood trauma, suppression, shame, stigmas, mental health, PTSD, first responders, lack of voice, gaslit by media, gaslit by employer, suicide, lack of accountability, meditation, how the medical system deals with PTSD and chronic pain, shame, colonization, parenting, teens, the criminal justice system, holistic spirituality, intergenerational trauma, anxiety, depression, emotions and feelings, disconnected, lost soul, homelessness. And this is just to name a few. I'm your host and creator, Carolyn Royer. Music composed and played by Alexis Brunette Royer. Breathe new life into flow. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sage Care, a podcast where I want to create an open, green space where we can address the stigmas, the judgments, the untruths that we tell ourselves, our families, our friends, within our communities, whether it be about mental health, addiction, family, parenting, coping skills, lack of services, increased homelessness, lack of accountability, politicians, the impact of not investing in mental health on our economy. And I mean, the list can just keep going on. But before I begin with my first episode, which is going to be shedding light on feelings and emotions, and we'll be exploring what are they, what's their purpose, do they even have a purpose, and what the heck is emotional intelligence anyway? Really? It's bad enough that I feel that I've been conned into believing that if I wanted to succeed in life, I must, one, I have to be intelligent. I have to be smart, use my head, be logical. Two, you have to be physically fit and healthy. What you put in your body is extremely important, and how you treat your body is extremely important. And three, show no emotions. Emotions equal weakness. If you want success, no emotions. No emotions means suck it up, buttercup. So now what you're telling me is that after centuries of telling us to suppress our emotions and that emotions are not important, or they're only important to a selective few, but in general, they only get in the way. Now you're saying we must be emotionally intelligent, really? What exactly does that mean? But before I get into that, I think that it's important to actually introduce myself. Introduce my purpose and my goals through sharing my journey of learning, of growth, and what I experienced through my observations in my professional career and the correlation I experienced through my own childhood trauma, and how my obsession to search for what is normal is what drove my quest of learning and knowledge and healing. It drove me into finding out how or what I had to become normal in society. I didn't want to become that apple that came from that tree because I knew exactly what people thought about the tree that I came from. I heard it all the time. And I really wanted to distance myself from that and learn how to integrate myself into society without having to carry the baggage of my childhood trauma. Because nobody likes anything with baggage, right? So I guess you can say that I'm calling this my pre-episode to my episode. Introduction to your host and creator of Sage Care, Carolyn Royer. Who am I and where do I come from? What experiences have I accumulated throughout my life, personal, as a student, as a professional, and how my personal and workplace trauma pushed me to absolute exhaustion? Not stopping as I continually tried to find my own healing path, as I stumbled several times, sometimes over the same rock, sometimes over a different rock, but it was a rock just the same. And sometimes I stumbled or tripped over, whether it be a log or running into a gate or a door that I couldn't open, or I thought I couldn't open, couldn't climb, or I thought that I couldn't climb. They look like mountains. But with each stumble, with each fall, with each climb, and sometimes crawling, in the last couple years, it has been crawling for me. I may have ended up with bruises, a limp, a few scars, a few broken bones. But in the end, I always mended, and I always refused to give up, even when it seemed like I had given up. And I have to admit that this time, I almost didn't get back up. I didn't realize the amount of energy I had used over the years just trying to survive and just trying to fit in to what society calls normal. It had taken a toll on my mental health and my physical body. And like I said, I almost didn't get back up this time. I really had to hang on to my why, my raison d'être, like it was my oxygen tank. It was my life on the line. Now, I'm not going to claim that I have all the answers, because I don't. I never did. I never will. All I can claim is what my experiences were and how they impacted me from my viewpoint, and how my early experiences shaped my views of the world and really pushed me to learn more about my own experiences before I was able to start my own true healing. And how my inability to speak my truth had a huge impact on my relationships with friends, families, and partners. And how really not being able to speak that truth, where some were really able to take advantage of that. Not feeling like I could be myself, but be who I thought others wanted me to be. And again, being taken advantage in that situation. And also be what people wanted to see. Being the chameleon to fit in, whatever situation I was put in, and adjusting myself to what others wanted. So adjusting how I spoke, adjusting my accent, changing my name, adjusting and changing what I wore, falling into the trap of judging others and being judged, allowing myself to compromise just to avoid conflict, shutting down my own femininity to survive my misogynistic upbringing, suppress all emotions, because isn't that what we're supposed to do to become successful? Suck it up, put your head down and plow through, and you'll be just fine, right? Well, I started to recognize my own differences at an early age and the impact of my childhood trauma on my person, my mental health, and my physical health. It's what attracted me to social work. It's what attracted me to child protection. It's what attracted me to probation. It's what attracted me to spirituality. The constant pursuit of trying to figure out what normal really was, and maybe being able to feel what it might be like to fit in. What my education and my career did for me was help me process my own childhood trauma, and this was a huge step towards my healing journey. Even though, one, I still had a long road ahead of me, and two, I didn't recognize it at the time. So my goal and my purpose with my podcast is to bring awareness and teaching by incorporating my own journey of learning and growth and trying to navigate a broken system. In 2017, when I was diagnosed with PTSD, I found it extremely difficult navigating a system that I was familiar with and that I worked for 20 years in. I have no idea how someone who is not familiar with the system navigates it. My purpose is not to blame or shame people, but to explore the issues and the roadblocks and the dilemmas that I've encountered along the way, and how we have become just too fearful and too ashamed to bring them up for fear of being judged. All we have to do is just look on social media with the number of judgments, criticisms that we see daily, and I haven't been excluded from that. Between body size, tight face, no tight face, big lips, no butt, big butt, two butts, how many times you shower your children, dyeing your child's hair, how you hold your baby, how you hold your head up, or maybe you don't. It's nonstop judgment. And it's the same judgments we experience and hear within our circle of friends, our small communities, our bigger communities, our families. The only difference is that social media is out there for everybody to see on a much bigger scale. Those judgments and stigmas and the rudeness and the bullies, they've always existed. Only now they're being called out on social media. Whereas in our smaller groups, the bullies continue to bully because nobody calls them out. All the judgments, what you feed your kid, how you parent your children, what the child is wearing, what your husband did, all those whispers and gossips that we hear on the down low is now for everybody to see how people are being judged and treated daily. So it's always existed. Now it's just in our face. And we're asking ourselves why people can't cope? Really? Or why people find it so difficult to make the tiniest decisions in their lives? Of course they can't. Every decision that they make is never good enough for somebody. Okay, so just so you know, doing this podcast, I am going to find it sometimes difficult keeping myself on track because I tend to find these little paths and I kind of diverge myself onto them. But I'm working on it. So the purpose is, who am I? Let's get into that. So I'm a 47-year-old French Canadian with Métis background. I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I'm a social worker, and a previous first responder with over 20 years experience in the field of child protection, social services, mental health, addiction, trauma, and the criminal justice system. I am a survivor of workplace trauma. I'm a survivor of childhood trauma. I am Carolyn Royer from the small Northern Ontario community. So I was born and raised in a small mining, logging community in Northern Ontario. Poverty rates were high and higher once the logging business dwindled and the mine shut down. With the increase in poverty rates, addiction appeared to have increased, and as did family violence. So growing up in a small community, services were always lacking. You had to be creative. Isolation common, and family violence and abuse all kept quiet. And I can tell you when I started my career, that hasn't changed. In my family home, there wasn't much emphasis made on education. The expectation was that hopefully I graduated high school. It was just a simple life. When it came to my education, I always felt that I wasn't given the benefit of the doubt when it came to my abilities. Probably because I was always told that my head was always in the clouds. La tête est dans la... Caroline, ta tête est dans lune. That's what I've heard frequently. Your head is in the clouds. In grade 8, they recommended that when I attend high school that I attend general classes. I refused and signed up for advance. When we were applying for post-secondary education, I was encouraged to apply to college. Once again, I refused, and I applied only to university and got in. Higher education was not a topic of discussion in our family home. So I'm not sure where I got that push to apply, but I knew that if I wanted to become something, I couldn't keep working at our local KFC for minimum wage for the rest of my life. So I graduated university in 98. And if people in Ontario are familiar with that era, we called it the Mike Harris days, or the Mike Harris era, where all services were literally, they were slashed, butchered, dissolved. And how we're still dealing with the consequences of those cuts today within our long-term care homes, with the lack of support and services, and how the elderly and the vulnerable died during the pandemic because of the direct correlation with those cuts. 2, mental health services and the deconstruction of many services with no replacement, and finding many of those individuals living in the streets or in our jail system with no recourse to mental health services. And because at that time there were basically little to no full-time social work positions in Ontario, and because I had student loans to pay, I started my career in British Columbia, where I got hired on as a full-time child protection worker. And I worked out there for about 2 years. And that was the most eye-opening, one of the biggest learning experiences I had gone through in my life. This is when I was first introduced to the magnitude and the damage that the residential schools had and have continue on our Indigenous communities in our country. I remember being in disbelief with how we treated people, and not just a culture, but how we were treating people, human beings. The shame and disgust that I felt for what our society allowed to happen with zero intervention from anybody. And let me tell you, throughout my career, this zero intervention from people is very common. People will stand around and watch the bully. People will stand around and allow the abuse to continue without intervening. I don't understand. And how we continue to feel and experience the long-lasting traumatic effects throughout our nation because of the residential schools and the decolonization. I was lucky. I had the privilege of working with various band leaders and communities as we worked on proper protocol when going into the Indigenous communities and working towards the Indigenous communities having their own independent child welfare system. I returned to Ontario in 2000, and I continued to work in the field of child welfare for another 7 years. When I returned to Ontario, I felt like I'd entered a time warp, like into 1950. It was strange for me. I had this false belief that child welfare was one the same across Canada. Nope, it's not. Not only was Ontario lagging when it came to the Indigenous issues in child welfare and land settlement, and we still are experiencing this today, and it's been like 20 years since I'm back in Ontario. But we were also behind in the child welfare system, and how we were executing and how we were training child protection workers. So I had this false belief that for some reason Ontario was ahead of the game, but I was completely wrong. When I returned to Ontario, I just realized just how far behind we were and how it was all about old money and old ideas. The other thing that shocked me when I started my career was that nobody wanted to talk about child welfare, about child abuse, the impact of domestic violence and addiction. Being new in my career and wanting to talk about, what I was learning to family and friends, but nobody wanted to hear it. And I was told several times, we know it happens, but we just don't want to hear about it. But then when the media, quote unquote, reports something, everybody is up in arms and everybody has an opinion on what should be done. But nobody's part of the solution in problem solving beforehand. So in 2007 is when I decided to switch gears in my profession. I had enough of continually witnessing the impact of poverty, mental health, addictions, domestic violence, custody disputes on children. So I switched to probation and parole. Yeah, I'm laughing. Not much of a switch there. So part of my struggle through my career was me and my false belief that I created that if I completed university, I would be on par. So I would be on even ground with everybody else, with the rest of society. That's how low my self-worth was. So for me, it was confusing when I returned to Ontario and still being exposed to the same judgments and stigmas that I grew up with, now just in a different community. And now I was witnessing it among professionals. To me, education equaled no judgments, no stigmas, because you're educated now. You know better. That's not true. It's completely false. It's a false belief that I created. So throughout my career, it never ceased to amaze me just how much our communities and our various systems continue to stigmatize mental health to the point where people, they're too fearful, they're too shy, they're embarrassed, they're ashamed to come forward and receive the help that they deserve. And then to witness when people finally do have the courage to come forward and seek help, they are met with resistance, lack of services, judgments, which then leads them to desperation, hopelessness, loneliness, and despair. Over the years, I've observed an increase in the number of mental health cases with no increase in service, or very little. They just keep juggling it around. They make it look like they're giving you services, but then it's taken away, which has and continues to put tremendous stress on our frontline professionals who are not always equipped or trained to deal with mental health. Whenever there are quote unquote cuts needed or required, or however they want to word it within our system, mental health services are always the first on the chopping block. And in my opinion, and research does support the strong opinion that I have on this, cutting mental health services is counterproductive because then all other services, their costs increase. The cost of policing increase because of the lack of mental health services, which means the court costs increase, overtime, emergency rooms, addiction, the list goes on. This has been the ongoing cycle that I've witnessed and experienced for at least 20 years. That's professionally, with no progress in sight. Services for mental health have been on the decline, and the services that are available have the luxury of choosing which sector of the population they choose or don't choose to work with, which are usually individuals who are involved in the criminal justice system, leaving a big gap in many small communities. As a former first responder, I have been on leave for almost 4 years now, dealing with my own mental health after being diagnosed with PTSD in 2018. Being a social worker and studying mental health and working with others on their mental health needs, I can say that this has been an extremely frustrating road. I can't imagine how it would be for someone who has no idea where to start. Or maybe I found it frustrating because there is such a disconnect with all service providers, with everyone having their own take on mental health, PTSD, and physical pain, none of which coincide with each other. Instead, what you get is, hurry up and get better. You should be over it by now. Other people have been through the same. What's wrong with you? Your physical pain is all in your head. It has nothing to do with your past injuries or your trauma. We'll deal with your physical pain after we deal with your mental health. What this pandemic has shown me is a lot of sucking it up. It just doesn't work anymore, and it never has. People are so used to hearing and saying, just suck it up. Well, we've been doing that. We've been doing that for years, and there's no more room to suck it up anymore. So get ready as I tackle these issues one by one with stories, anecdotes, guest speakers, maybe some cries, I'm not going to lie, but hopefully laughs, more solutions, and a lot of hope. So I look forward to taking you on this journey with me. And hopefully I get to hear from you and your thoughts and your ideas on what you'd like to hear in this podcast as well. Cheers, and stay tuned for episode 1 on shedding light with feelings and emotions. Cheers, everybody.